The gavel had not even fallen when the entire courtroom froze. The air was still, thick with disbelief, as a young woman in a cream-colored blazer raised her father's police badge like it was a weapon. "Do you even know who my father is?" she said, her voice sharp with the confidence of someone who had never once been told no. The nameplate on the bench read Judge Judith Files, and the courtroom cameras caught every flicker of her face as the arrogance in that single sentence landed like an insult to the institution of justice itself. Samantha Torres was 24, the daughter of LAPD Captain Raymond Torres, and she believed the city of Los Angeles bent around her name. Her perfectly manicured fingers glimmered with polished silver rings as she waved the badge, as if it were her passport through accountability. The badge, heavy with meaning, reflected the courtroom lights, an emblem of service, turned symbol of arrogance. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Even the bailiff looked stunned, his jaw set tight as if he were holding back a reaction that could end his career. The spectators, used to the fireworks of daytime courtroom television, knew instinctively that this moment was different. There was something sacrilegious in the gesture. That badge had seen the aftermath of robberies, domestic calls, and funerals. It was supposed to represent protection, not privilege. But to Samantha Torres, it was nothing more than an inheritance of immunity. She had grown up watching doors open for her at every mistake, every tantrum, every misstep. Parking tickets disappeared, professors adjusted her grades, and even the occasional bar fight ended with officers calling her "ma'am" and giving her a ride home. When you spend your life watching accountability dissolve under your last name, you start to believe you're untouchable. Judge Judy's eyes did not blink. She sat utterly still, her hands folded, her posture perfect, her silence more powerful than any outburst could have been. Those who had watched her for years recognized that silence. It was the pause before the storm, the second before judgment became something far greater than a verdict. Samantha mistook it for intimidation. She smiled, leaned slightly on the defendant's table, and said softly, "I'm just saying, Your Honor, there are certain things people like you might not understand about law enforcement families." It was the kind of condescending sweetness that could curdle blood. Somewhere in the gallery, someone gasped. A producer behind the camera whispered, "Oh my God, she just did that on national TV." What Samantha didn't know was that Judge Judy had already read every line of the case file the night before, and the file didn't just contain an unpaid traffic ticket or a misunderstanding over a minor accident. It contained police reports that should never have been buried, complaint logs that had been lost in transfer, and statements from a woman named Maria Gonzalez, a nurse and single mother who had been struck by Samantha's car in a hit-and-run 6 months earlier. The case had gone nowhere in the police system, dismissed as a clerical mix-up after Captain Torres's signature appeared on the internal memo. But Maria had not stopped fighting. When her civil suit landed on the desks of Judge Judy's producers, it stood out immediately, not because of the damages requested, but because of the cover letter she'd written herself. It was one sentence long: "If the courts can't hear me, maybe Judge Judy will." And now here they were. The nurse sat quietly in the plaintiff's chair, clutching a folder filled with photos of her damaged car and medical bills from the injury that had left her limping for months. Across from her, Samantha Torres radiated entitlement. Every move, every gesture screamed disdain for the woman sitting opposite. She rolled her eyes when Maria tried to organize her papers. She laughed softly when the bailiff swore her in. She even whispered to her lawyer, "This will be over in 10 minutes." The cameras captured it all, the sneer, the careless confidence, the moment arrogance crossed from irritating to obscene. "Miss Torres," Judge Judy finally said, her voice calm but edged with the steel of authority, "are you waving a police badge in my courtroom?" Samantha tilted her chin, pretending confusion. "I'm just showing you, Your Honor, that my father—" "I didn't ask who your father was," Judy cut in. The words were quiet, deliberate, slicing through the tension like a scalpel. "I asked if you were waving a badge as if it were yours." The audience could feel the shift, the temperature of the room dropping several degrees. Even Samantha's lawyer looked uneasy, subtly pushing the badge back toward her purse. But the damage was done. In that moment, every symbol of power Samantha thought she possessed turned against her. The badge no longer gleamed with authority, it glinted with guilt. What no one yet knew was how deep that guilt went. The accident, the cover-up, the bribes of silence, it was all in the folder resting beside Judge Judy's elbow. She had spent hours reading it, her expression unreadable, her pen occasionally underlining words like witness intimidation and false report. There was a reason she hadn't opened with questions. She wanted to see the daughter of power reveal herself first, to expose the reflex that always came before accountability, the reflex to hide behind someone else's authority. And Samantha had done exactly that. When Judy finally spoke again, her tone carried the weight of the entire justice system. "Let me make something very clear, Miss Torres," she said, leaning slightly forward. "This courtroom doesn't care about your father's badge, his title, or your family's influence. Here, only truth carries weight. And right now, I'm struggling to see any of it coming from you." The words hung in the air, heavy, immovable. Samantha opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For the first time in her privileged life, her weapon had failed. The badge that had always protected her now felt like evidence. The gallery remained silent. Maria Gonzalez lowered her eyes and took a slow breath, a faint tremor in her hands. Judge Judy sat back, her pen tapping softly against the bench, her gaze never leaving Samantha's face. "We will begin with the facts," she said, and every camera in the room zoomed in. It was the beginning of the most shocking 25 minutes of Samantha Torres's life, the day the daughter of the city's police captain discovered that justice, when it finally wakes, has a memory sharper than any badge. Long before she stood in that courtroom, waving her father's badge like a divine shield, Samantha Torres had been raised inside a fortress of privilege so thick that reality never penetrated it. Her father, Captain Raymond Torres, was the kind of man the city wrote articles about, the cop with a conscience, the face of modern policing. Every award, every promotion, every glowing interview turned the Torres name into a symbol of honor. Samantha grew up in a home where her last name felt like currency, and the badge her father wore each morning seemed like the family's personal inheritance. The Torres house in Los Feliz had plaques on the walls, polished commendations in glass cases, and framed photographs of the captain shaking hands with mayors and governors. Samantha learned early that her father's authority didn't end at the precinct, it extended into restaurants, stores, and every corner of civic life. When a teacher gave her a C, she mentioned who her father was, and the grade, mysteriously, became an A. When she parked illegally outside a downtown salon, the tow truck driver recognized the last name and waved her off with a laugh. Consequences were something that happened to other people. Captain Torres didn't mean to raise a monster. He saw himself as a protector, a father who'd earned the right to make his daughter's life easier. But Samantha wasn't interested in fairness, she was addicted to the feeling of being untouchable. By her 20s, she treated laws like polite suggestions. She'd drink in restricted clubs, drive her luxury coupe down restricted streets, and if ever stopped by an officer, she would simply lower her sunglasses and whisper, "You might want to call your supervisor." It always worked. The badge was the magic word that turned accountability into apology. She began to believe she was above law, above judgment, above shame. And when she was caught in her first scandal, a university plagiarism accusation, her father's network smoothed it over before the dean could even finish reading the report. It was the same story, repeated over and over: mistake, exposure, rescue. Every rescue carved another line of arrogance into her smile. That smile was the same one she wore the night everything changed. It was a Thursday evening, a drizzle-soft night in Los Angeles. The city lights glowed off the wet asphalt as Samantha sped down Fairfax in her brand-new Porsche Cayenne, one hand on the wheel, the other texting. At the intersection of Melrose and Gardner, she clipped the rear bumper of a small Toyota sedan. The driver, Maria Gonzalez, a nurse just off a double shift, felt the impact and swerved to a stop. Samantha didn't. She drove another block before pulling over. Witnesses would later say she stepped out, looked at the damage to her own car, muttered, "Not worth it," and drove off. Maria limped out of her car, her hand trembling as she tried to steady herself. Her vehicle was totaled, her knee badly twisted, and her savings drained within weeks by repair costs and medical bills. But what truly broke her spirit wasn't the accident, it was the aftermath. When Maria filed a police report, the officer taking her statement looked uneasy. "You're sure it was Samantha Torres?" he asked. "The captain's daughter?" Within days, the report vanished from the system. Maria received a voicemail from an insurance liaison suggesting it would be best to drop the matter. She refused. She called the station again and again, only to be told the case had been resolved internally. Resolved meant buried. Weeks later, she received an anonymous letter, "Move on. You're only going to make things harder for yourself." It was unsigned, but the message was clear. Maria wasn't supposed to fight back. The people who hid behind badges had ways of making problems disappear. But Maria Gonzalez wasn't like the others who had learned to stay quiet. She was a nurse, a single mother, and the daughter of immigrants who had taught her one sacred rule: silence is the accomplice of injustice. So she wrote directly to the producers of Judge Judy. She didn't know if it would even reach anyone. She didn't have a lawyer, or a strategy, or a hope of winning. All she had was truth, and a file full of ignored complaints. Against every odd, the letter landed on Judge Judy's desk. And when the judge read it, something in her hardened. Judy had seen entitlement before, but this one was personal. The idea that a badge, something she had always respected as a symbol of service, had been used to humiliate a working mother was intolerable. The producers contacted both parties, framing it as a civil damages case. Samantha agreed immediately, believing it would be another chance to show off on television. She told her friends, laughing, "Maybe I'll get famous." She had no idea that the woman she was mocking had already given Judge Judy permission to access the original police files, and that those files contained inconsistencies that pointed directly to her father's desk. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, Judy's team dug through archived databases, pulled internal logs, and cross-referenced license plate sightings from traffic cameras. The pattern that emerged wasn't just negligence, it was privilege institutionalized, repeated, protected, and polished until it gleamed like respectability. By the time the cameras rolled, Judge Judy wasn't just looking at a spoiled young woman, she was looking at a system that had allowed arrogance to fester behind a badge. She knew the case would draw outrage, and she was ready for it. She had instructed her staff to keep the focus on facts, not titles. "No one's name changes the law," she said before filming began. But Samantha didn't hear that warning. She strutted into the courtroom that morning as though it were another stage for her confidence, a performance she'd been practicing her whole life. And now, as the case unfolded, the performance was cracking. The badge that had once symbolized her father's protection now sat like a curse on the table beside her. Judge Judy's questions grew sharper with each answer. The camera zoomed in on the girl who had never faced the word consequences, and the world leaned closer to watch what happened when entitlement finally met evidence. The more Judge Judy examined the evidence, the clearer it became: Samantha Torres's hit-and-run wasn't an isolated mistake, it was the latest chapter in a story written by years of quiet immunity. The file on her desk wasn't just thick, it was damning. Inside were records from the University Misconduct Office, copies of complaints from restaurant staff, and a string of citations marked dismissed. Each one carried the same signature somewhere near the bottom: Captain Raymond Torres. What began as a father's instinct to protect his daughter had metastasized into something darker, an unspoken agreement that Samantha could live above the rules everyone else had to follow. In the quiet of her chambers the night before filming, Judy had flipped through those pages and felt something heavy settle in her chest. She had always respected police officers, their badges represented order, sacrifice, and discipline, but here she saw that sacred symbol bent into a personal shield. Samantha hadn't learned empathy, she had learned exemption. Judy underlined a line in one of the internal memos: "Incident resolved internally at captain's discretion." She circled it twice. That line, repeated across multiple reports, told the entire story. Samantha's record was littered with near-identical incidents. In 2018, a boutique owner accused her of threatening to call the chief after being asked to pay for a damaged display. In 2019, she shouted down a valet who refused to park in a fire lane. That complaint vanished, too. In 2021, a campus security guard filed a report after she screamed at him for ticketing her illegally parked Mercedes. The guard later withdrew it, claiming miscommunication. Each event small on its own, but together they formed a mosaic of entitlement. She didn't see herself as part of the public her father swore to protect, she saw herself as the exception to every rule he enforced. Judy's research team contacted the victims of those incidents one by one. Some were still afraid to speak. A barista who once refused Samantha's service after a drunken outburst confessed that 2 uniformed officers had appeared at his cafe the next morning, warning him to let it go. A landlord admitted that after an argument over rent, he received a surprise visit from a building inspector citing random code violations. Everywhere Samantha went, her father's influence followed, invisible but unmistakable. It wasn't violence that held people silent, it was reputation. People didn't want to go to war with the police captain's daughter. They wanted peace, even if it meant swallowing injustice. Inside the courtroom, Samantha still believed none of this would surface. She saw television lights and thought it was another stage for her charm. She smiled at the cameras, tapped her nails against the desk, whispered jokes to her attorney. But the confidence was brittle, performative, a reflex built from years of getting away with it. Judge Judy noticed the pattern instantly, the same casual smirk she'd seen on hundreds of defendants who mistook arrogance for intelligence. The judge let her talk, letting the rope of her own words tighten. "Miss Torres," Judy began, "how many driving citations have you received in the last 5 years?" Samantha tilted her head. "A few minor ones. Most were misunderstandings." 16, Judy corrected, reading from her notes. 16. Of those, 14 were dismissed. Do you know how unusual that is for someone your age? Samantha shrugged. "I guess people understand accidents happen." "No," Judy said flatly. "People understand influence happens." The gallery murmured. Samantha's lawyer leaned forward to object, but Judy raised a single finger and the room fell silent again. That was all it took, decades of authority condensed into a gesture. While Judy questioned Samantha, Maria Gonzalez sat perfectly still, eyes down, listening. She hadn't come for revenge. She wanted recognition, that what happened to her mattered, even if the person responsible carried a badge by bloodline. Every time Samantha deflected responsibility, Maria's expression grew tighter. She had spent months chasing signatures, writing letters, begging departments for transparency. Every door that closed on her had carried the same phrase, "Captain Torres's daughter." That's complicated. Judy turned to Maria now. "Mrs. Gonzalez, did you ever receive any formal apology from the defendant or her family?" Maria shook her head. "No, Your Honor. I only received a call from an officer saying the case was being resolved." "Resolved?" Judy repeated. "Meaning covered up." The word cracked through the air. The cameras caught Samantha's quick glance toward the gallery, searching for her father. He wasn't there, at least not yet. Judy noticed the panic flash across her face, then vanish under another layer of arrogance. She leaned back in her chair, pretending indifference. "Miss Torres," Judy said quietly, "do you understand that attempting to use your father's position to interfere with an investigation is a serious offense?" "I didn't interfere," Samantha snapped. "I just didn't want my father embarrassed by a stupid accident." There it was, the confession hidden inside the justification. The courtroom shifted, even the bailiff's stance changed. Judy leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low, deliberate cadence. "You wanted to protect your father's reputation, and instead you used it as a shield. You turned his badge into a weapon. And now you're surprised that the recoil hurts. For a moment Samantha couldn't find words. The camera zoomed in as she forced a laugh, but it sounded wrong, thin, defensive. "You're overreacting," she said finally. "It's not that deep." Judy smiled, a small, dangerous smile. "Miss Torres, I've been a judge longer than you've been alive. Believe me, it's always that deep." The rest of the questioning was surgical. Judy walked her through the night of the accident step by step, the route she drove, the speed, the text messages on her phone, the disappearance of the initial police report. Each answer tightened the net. Samantha's lawyer tried to pivot, but Judy's tone never rose, never cracked. She didn't need anger, she had evidence. By the time Section 3 of this unfolding story reached its final minutes, the audience could sense the shift. The badge that once commanded obedience now symbolized something toxic. Every word Samantha spoke corroded it further. Behind her practiced poise, fear began to bloom, small at first, then spreading as she realized the woman across the bench wasn't intimidated by her family's power. Judge Judy wasn't one of her father's subordinates. She was justice personified, and justice had an excellent memory. By the time the fourth hour of testimony began, the courtroom felt less like a stage and more like a battlefield. The cameras hummed quietly, every seat in the gallery was filled, and the tension was so thick it muffled even the sound of shuffling papers. Samantha Torres sat rigid in her chair, her poise cracking under the weight of her own confidence. Her lawyer whispered something into her ear, something like, "Stay calm, answer only what's asked," but she waved him off impatiently. For 24 years, she'd watched people in uniforms rush to fix her mistakes. She couldn't believe that this time, no one was coming. Across from her, Maria Gonzalez kept her hands folded on the table, her thumb running slowly along the edge of a photograph, her ruined car, crushed and twisted from the impact that had nearly crippled her. The image trembled faintly between her fingers, but her face remained composed. When she looked at Samantha, there was no hatred, only exhaustion. For months, she had been chasing accountability through walls of silence and polite bureaucracy. Now, at last, someone powerful was listening. Judge Judy adjusted her glasses and turned the next page in the folder, her movements deliberate, unhurried. Each turn of the page was a verdict in miniature. "Miss Torres," she began, "when you first spoke to the investigating officer, did you tell him you were driving the vehicle involved in the collision?" Samantha crossed her arms. "I told him I was near the area. I wasn't sure if I'd actually hit her car. It was dark." "You weren't sure," Judy repeated, her tone measured. "And yet, according to the witness statement, you exited your car, examined the damage to your bumper, and then left the scene. Is that correct?" Samantha's lips parted. "That's an exaggeration." "No," Judy said softly, "it's an observation." The gallery stirred. The bailiff's voice cut through, "Order in the court." The murmuring ceased instantly. Judy set the paper aside and looked directly at Samantha. "Do you understand what leaving the scene of an accident means under California law?" "I didn't flee," Samantha said quickly. "I just thought it wasn't serious enough to report." "You thought," Judy repeated, her voice like glass. "You decided that for yourself, without any assessment, without calling the victim, without even checking if she was injured. Because in your world, Miss Torres, responsibility is optional." A flush crept up Samantha's neck. "That's not fair." "Fairness?" Judy's tone sharpened. "You want to talk about fairness? Tell that to the woman whose medical bills are higher than your car payment. Tell that to the people who called the police and were told their reports had been misplaced. Tell that to every citizen who looks at that badge," she pointed toward the small piece of metal glinting beside Samantha's purse, "and wonders if it stands for justice or for privilege." The room went silent again. Samantha swallowed hard, her chin trembling, but her pride still wouldn't let her back down. "You don't understand, Your Honor. You don't know what it's like to grow up under that kind of pressure. My father expects perfection. Everything I do reflects on him. Sometimes I just..." Use his power to erase your mistakes. Judy interrupted. I was trying to protect him. Samantha shouted. Judy's eyes narrowed, the steel returning to her voice. No, Miss Torres. You were trying to protect yourself. You used your father's reputation as a shield, and you've done it so long you've forgotten what integrity even looks like. For the first time, Samantha had no response. Her shoulders sagged slightly, her eyes darting to the gallery. And there, sitting in the back row in full uniform, was her father. Captain Raymond Torres had entered quietly, his presence commanding even without a word. His expression was unreadable, but the pain in his eyes was unmistakable. When Samantha saw him, her composure fractured completely. Dad, she whispered. He didn't move. Judy noticed him immediately. Captain Torres, she said, her tone shifting from confrontation to solemnity, thank you for joining us. I assume you're here voluntarily. Yes, Your Honor, he said, his voice low. I'm here as a father, not as an officer. Then you'll understand that in this courtroom, your rank has no bearing on the truth. He nodded once, stiffly. Understood. The cameras zoomed in on Samantha, whose mascara was starting to smudge from tears she could no longer suppress. Dad, please, she whispered again, but he didn't speak. His silence said everything, the realization that years of indulgence had led her to this moment. Judge Judy leaned forward. Miss Torres, this court has reviewed not only the evidence of this accident but a troubling pattern of misconduct tied to your name. We have records of at least 4 incidents where your father's position directly influenced the outcome of official investigations. That is not coincidence, that is culture. And today, it ends. Samantha's breath came in sharp gasps now. You're trying to ruin my family, she said weakly. No, Judy replied, her voice colder than ever. You already did that. The judge turned to Maria. Mrs. Gonzalez, please stand. Maria rose slowly. Her limp was still faint but visible. Judy's gaze softened. You did what countless people are too afraid to do. You faced power and told the truth. This court thanks you for that courage. Maria's eyes welled up, and she nodded silently. Judy looked back at Samantha, whose father still hadn't moved. Miss Torres, you were born into privilege, but privilege is not a crime. What you did with it, however, using your father's badge to intimidate others, to escape consequences, to manipulate justice, that is unforgivable. You wanted to prove your superiority, instead, you've proved your corruption. Then came the moment no one would forget. Judy lifted a small evidence envelope from the desk and slid it across the table. Inside is a photo from a traffic camera taken 30 seconds after the collision. It shows you texting while driving. That's your license plate, your phone, your car. Evidence doesn't care about your father's title. The last remnants of Samantha's composure broke. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. The courtroom remained still, the silence heavy with judgment. Judge Judy folded her hands. You will listen carefully, Miss Torres, because the next words I speak will determine the direction of your life. For too long, you've hidden behind a symbol of honor you did not earn. Today, you'll learn what it truly means to respect it. The gallery held its breath. The sentence had not yet been spoken, but everyone in that room could feel it approaching like a storm rolling over the horizon. When Judge Judy finally spoke again, her voice carried the weight of decades of justice. Every syllable landed like a gavel strike, calm, deliberate, unflinching. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the exact moment the line between power and accountability vanished. Miss Torres, she began, this court has reviewed your statements, the evidence of the collision, and the pattern of behavior that extends well beyond a single night of poor judgment. You stand here today not just for a hit and run, but for the corruption of a principle your father spent his life defending. Samantha's eyes were red, her mascara streaked down her cheeks. She looked smaller now, deflated, stripped of the entitlement that had once filled her every gesture. I'm sorry, she murmured, barely audible. I didn't mean for any of this. Don't apologize to me, Judy interrupted. Apologize to the woman whose life you endangered. Apologize to the citizens who pay for a justice system you treated like a family favor. Apologize to the badge you mocked. Maria Gonzalez rose hesitantly, her eyes glistening. Your Honor, she said softly, I just wanted the truth. I didn't want to ruin anyone's life. Judy nodded, her expression softening for the first time. And that's what separates people like you from people like her. You seek justice, not revenge. She turned back to Samantha. You claim you were protecting your father, but what you've done is humiliate him. I have no doubt that Captain Torres has served his city with honor. But honor doesn't erase wrongdoing, it amplifies it when abused. The children of those who serve don't get lighter burdens. They get heavier ones. You were supposed to uphold his legacy, not weaponize it. Samantha sobbed openly now, shoulders shaking. Her father stood in the back, every line of his face etched with disbelief and shame. He hadn't moved for the entire session, hands clasped behind his back as if he were standing at attention before a superior officer. When Judy looked up at him, he met her gaze squarely. Captain Torres, she said, you have my respect for showing up today. But I must ask you something difficult. Have you interfered in this or any previous investigation involving your daughter? His jaw tightened. Yes, Your Honor, he said quietly. I've used my position to shield her more times than I can count. I told myself I was being a father. But I was being a coward. A collective murmur swept through the room. Samantha turned toward him, her voice cracking. Dad, please, stop. But he didn't. I'm done stopping the truth, he said. I failed you as a father by never letting you fail on your own. Maybe this will teach us both something. Judy's face remained composed, but her tone softened. Captain, accountability begins when truth is spoken aloud. That is the first step toward redemption. She turned back to Samantha. And as for you, Miss Torres, this court is about to give you the one gift no one has ever given you, consequences. She reached for the folder in front of her. Effective immediately, you are ordered to pay full restitution to Mrs. Gonzalez in the amount of $42,000 for damages and medical expenses. In addition, this court imposes a $25,000 fine for contempt and misuse of authority. You will complete 200 hours of community service in the same district your father serves. And for the next 12 months, your driver's license is suspended. Finally, this judgment will be made public in its entirety. The world will know exactly how the law treats the powerful when they forget humility. The room was silent except for Samantha's quiet crying. Judy's tone didn't waver. Justice isn't about humiliation. It's about restoration. Mrs. Gonzalez deserves peace, and the public deserves proof that a badge is not a crown. Then Judy turned her eyes toward Captain Torres. There's one more matter. I'm recommending that Internal Affairs review your past case involvement for potential conflicts of interest. You've earned respect, Captain, but respect is renewed daily. You understand that? He nodded, his voice rough. I do, Your Honor. What happened next was not in the script of any courtroom show. The captain stepped forward, unpinned his badge from his uniform, and placed it gently on the bench before Judge Judy. The sound of metal against wood echoed through the room like a closing chapter. This belongs to the people, he said. I forgot that. Thank you for reminding me. No one breathed. Samantha looked at her father as if the ground beneath her had vanished. The man who had always been her shield was now choosing integrity over protection. It was the most painful lesson of her life, and the most necessary. Judy studied the badge for a long moment, then pushed it back toward him. Keep it, she said quietly. You've just earned it back. Tears welled in his eyes, but he said nothing. He nodded once, reclaimed the badge, and stepped back. The cameras captured every second, the humiliation, the redemption, the silent exchange of understanding between father and daughter. Somewhere in the gallery, someone began to clap softly. Within seconds, the entire courtroom joined in. Not in celebration, but in acknowledgement, that for once, justice had been blind to power. When the applause faded, Judy's closing words echoed through the microphones and into millions of homes. Let this be a reminder: titles fade, power shifts, but truth endures. No one, no daughter, no captain, no judge, is above the law. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited for statements. The clip would go viral within hours: the daughter's tears, the father's surrender, the judge's unwavering calm. The headline practically wrote itself: the badge that backfired. Inside, as the courtroom emptied, Maria Gonzalez approached Samantha quietly. "I forgive you," she said. Samantha looked up, startled. "Why?" "Because forgiveness is freedom," Maria replied. "And I'm done carrying you." That simple mercy struck harder than any verdict. Samantha lowered her head, speechless. Judge Judy watched the exchange without a word, then finally rose, gathering her papers. Her final gavel strike echoed like a closing heartbeat. That afternoon, sunlight poured through the tall courtroom windows as if cleansing the space where arrogance had stood. A police captain left without his rank's protection, but with his integrity restored. A nurse walked out whole again, no longer invisible. And a daughter, once untouchable, walked out into a world that finally saw her for what she was: human, accountable, and, for the first time, free from the illusion her last name had built.